Welcome to episode 12 of Renewing the Conversation, a series of interviews where we talk to leading industry professionals and experts about renewable energy and heating, with a focus on the home and what challenges face the industry and homeowners.
Today we welcome Emma Bohan, General Manager of IMS Heat Pumps. Emma talks to us about how ground source differs from air source and how important it is to get your heat loss calculations right from the outset.
Before we get started, we want to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, the MCS, which define, maintain and improve quality by certifying products and installers so homeowners can have confidence in the low carbon technology they invest in. To find out more, head over to www.mcscertified.com.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and please show us your support by giving us a thumbs up. Enjoy the interview. Hi Emma, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out away from IMS Heat Pumps. I know that IMS does ground source and air source. And I think that maybe with all the talk of heat pumps at the moment in the press and the media, people aren't really maybe fully appreciating that heat pumps actually refer to ground source and air source. They kind of just are maybe associating heat pumps only with air source. So could you just tell us a little bit about the differences? And with your customers that you supply the ground source and the air source to, what are the fundamental differences that you see between those customers that are kind of your average customer for each of those sectors?
Okay, so the biggest difference between the air source and the ground source is, of course, the requirement for ground in some way or another. So there's two ways of the collectors for the ground source. With an air source, it's the fan unit that is collecting the energy that we use with the heat pump. With the ground source, you have horizontal, which is where you will trench out a large section of land and lay pipes, or you have the vertical, which is where you have a drilling rig on site and we will go down. So trenches require more land, rule of thumb, 2 to 3 times the heated floor area of the property is needed. So we often have people who come and say, I've got quite a large garden. How large is large? You know, if you think that the average requirement is 600 or 800 meters square of available land, and that we don't really want to go border to border. We're not coming right up against your house because of the services. You can't build over the top of it. So, you know, you're not even put a patio. So it has to be truly available. So, you know, it suits the bigger, more rural properties in that respect. However, you can do the boreholes with a much smaller requirement for land. And we've actually done projects where, you know, it literally is a borehole in somebody's driveway. It all depends really on the economics of the project. The thing with the ground source is they are more expensive than an air source. The units are slightly more expensive than the standard air source unit, but it's the groundworks that will cost you the more money. The trenching version is cheaper than the borehole. With a borehole, you're mobilizing specialist drilling equipment, and that needs, you know, that is costly. But it's horses for courses, because the view of some of the larger properties being serviced by single air source heat pump unit solutions, that's when ground source makes sense.
So do you see from your customers that maybe because of the land requirements and the size of property, is ground source customers, are they typically more rural, and then your kind of air source customers are more suburban?
Typically, yes, that is the case, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, the things you have to think about is, you know, if I'm going to put a borehole in my front garden, you know, you've got to get a drilling rig down, you know, a suburban road. And that, you know, in itself can cause issues. You know, you have to live with councils and close roads off, but, you know, but it's not doable. And I think, you know, as heat pumps are more acceptable, you know, the will to do more interesting things in suburban ground source views will grow. But yes, typically our customers are in more rural locations. In Scotland, where we do a lot of work, they on certain sites they're often drilling for water, and at the same time they'll put holes for the ground source heat pump. It makes sense. But then, you know, the farmers, people with large houses, large amounts of land, you know, ground source, and they aren't requiring the bigger outputs that you can get from a ground source solution.
You mentioned that ground source is more of a heavy investment at the outset. What kind of rough ballpark is your average project? I mean, I know that obviously some of your projects must be really exciting and grand on scale, but what is your kind of like average project cost for ground source and for air source?
So we will ballpark our customers who are looking for indicative costs, 9 to 15 for an air source, 12 to 20 for a ground source. I would say that our average project cost on a ground source is about £18,000.
And so we've seen that the government has this week come out and said that £5,000 grant for air source. I believe we recently were told that it's just going to be an extra £1,000 for ground source. As a business owner and who is selling heat pumps and ground source and air source as a technology, and hopefully trying to meet the demands that the government is imposing up to 900,000 homes per year, do you think that these grants are sufficient?
No, in a word. The view that £5,000 does go some way towards the cost of an air source heat pump, there's no doubt. The awareness that the green homes grants at 5,000 and now the boiler upgrade scheme at 5,000 is creating in the market is phenomenal. Good. It's about time that they were treated with the respect that they deserve in terms of what they can do for our environment. But it does price a lot of people out. At the end of the day, if I'm ballparking 9 to 15, you've still got to find another £4,000 to £9,000 to have an air source heat pump installed. There's a lot of people who really do want to do it. Our inbox is full of people who, why do you want a heat pump? I want to do the right thing. I want to do low carbon. I want to go green. And there are, the fact is that there are a lot of people who don't have £9,000 invested in a heating system right now. From our view, we've been selling heat pumps before there were grants, before the RHI ground source. We were doing it. They were cheaper then, but they did sell. I guess, one view of the situation is there are still lots of people out there with the money who want to do the right thing. It's unfortunate that the level of support now, though, will hit what I think is always the people who get hit. It's like, low to middle income families who want to do something and haven't got, a pot of cash sat in the bank account.
You mentioned that, obviously, you are in business and therefore you obviously always have a demand, but are you seeing an increase in demand from just the amount of publicity that heat pumps are getting at the the Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, every time somebody talks heat pumps in the press, the inbox pings, the website traffic goes bananas. I speak to a lot of people in the industry and everybody is saying exactly the same thing. The thing we are in the moment, of course, is this the view that the RHI, which is the more generous grant, although you have to find the money up front, comes to the end in March. I'll probably tell you that all the decent installers are probably fully booked already. And the lack of installers on the market, quality installers, I could take on 10 tomorrow. I just can't find them.
Really? So is that one of your biggest challenges as a business, is actually getting the installation team to kind of match the demand going forward?
We've always brought on apprentices, and we have 4 on the team at the moment. We have this year hired another 5 people. I'm still looking to recruit, but trying to find good quality people with heat pump experience is difficult. They are in high demand, and the thing about it is, on the one hand, it can sound a little disingenuous to people with good plumbing and heating skills who traditionally done gas. They are making decent money, and rightly so. They've got the skill set for that industry. You're an expensive trainee for me, though.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So manpower is one thing, and having the installers that the UK needs to meet these goals is one thing. Another thing that's been talked about a lot in the press is the focus on insulation in properties. Is that something that as IMS heat pumps, when you go in, is that one of the first things that you're looking for in that property and evaluating?
Our conversations with most of our leads are in part education and awareness. People have heard about heat pumps, they found us online, they want to know more about it. The first question I ask is, what brings you to want a heat pump? And if you're on a gas boiler, the view that even today, I know gas has gone a bit mental, but then so has electricity. You know, the gas is so much cheaper, but even with high efficiency performance of a heat pump, depending on how you use your gas, you know, depends very much on whether you're likely to see fuel cost savings. It has to be an eyes wide open conversation with the client. You're more likely to see cost savings. I know oil's been a bit fluctuating, but against the LPG, direct electric, and oil. But gas is really marginal, especially if, you know, as a lot of people are militant thermostat gas users. You know, it's 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, a couple of hours at the weekend. You know, the other thing, of course, when we're talking to them is that it is a myth that you can't heat a home with a heat pump if it's not insulated. It doesn't matter what you heat your home. If you're paying to heat the first 4 foot of the outside world, it's going to cost you more. So that's gas boiler or hamsters in series. You know, it just doesn't make sense to look at upgrading a heating system while having a not very well insulated home. So fabric first has to be something that people consider. Minimum insulation standards have always been a requirement for RHI. I'm assuming that's going to be something similar with the boiler scrappage scheme in terms of loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, if you can get it. And this is something that we suggest to people, you know, in the first instance, spend them, you know, if a heat pump is too expensive for you now, if your gas boiler is not at its end of its life now and you're not like looking to replace it, you know, people who put the gas boilers in 2 or 3 years ago and looking at it now, you just think, you know, is now the right time for you? Do spend the money, you know, upgrading your glazing, doing as much as you can to make your home, you know, as thermally efficient as it can be. And then, you know, over time, you can look at doing things like, you know, oversizing your radiators. There are small incremental things that people can do to spend money on now and then time it right for the heat pump. But in terms of sizing and designing a system, absolutely, we are looking at what that home is insulated with because we have to. The heat loss is the key. Good heat loss is and good design is the key of having a system that will absolutely work. We do this all the time. We install and we'll see you next year. You know, the clients are happy, their homes are warm, they have the hot water, you know, and they are eyes wide open on running costs in terms of what they are likely to see or not see in terms of saving.
So we've seen a lot of articles in the press recently, and one of the things that I've picked up on is that we're starting to see the term heat loss calculations or heat loss appearing more frequently. And I just really love you to explain to homeowners or people that are watching what heat loss is and what heat loss calculations are for those that have never heard the term before.
In its simplest form, it is determining how much heat you lose from the inside of your home to the outside world by understanding what's known as a U value of the properties that your home is made up of. In order to correctly size a heat pump, it's done on a room by room basis. So the measurements of every room, whether those rooms are external walls or internal walls, whether how much glazing they have, whether they have insulation above them or below them, what the wall is made out of, what your insulation is made out of. All of these items have got standard U values, which is how thermally efficient they are, which goes back to the fabric first approach. If you have a more thermally efficient room, you will lose less heat, therefore require less input into the room to get to your desired temperature. And once you've done that for every room in the house, once you add all of that up, that will give you a size requirement for the output of heat needed from a heat pump that enables you to choose the right heat pump to deliver that heat to that home. Mm-hmm. That's why it's also used, because once you understand what is needed to heat a room, you then have to look at the emitter that's used to put that heat into the room, so whether that's underfloor heating or whether that's the radiator. And looking at the existing radiator, if it's a retrofit, and saying, is this radiator at a lower temperature going to be able to deliver the heat into this room that needs to get it to your 18, 19, 21 degree ambient temperature? that is where the view of having to upgrade radiators comes from.
A lot of MCS installers will use the MCS heat calculator. I think it's a spreadsheet that basically they utilize to actually calculate the heat loss. How subjective is that actual calculation? Because we have seen an increase in the amount of heat loss calculations that are coming back to homeowners where heat pumps are recommended at very different sizes from the same people that came and evaluated the same property have come out with very different heat loss numbers at the end. So how subjective is that process?
It's absolutely as subjective as the person's knowledge who's completing the heat loss. There is, it's easy for new build, self-builds, renovations because you have architect's plans, building material designs where you know what that home is going to be built out of. Retrofit situation, how far are you going to go? How am I going to start drilling through walls to actually fully understand the insulation that was put in that cavity wall in the 60s, if that was happening? Am I going to be, chipping into, loft spaces to find out, exactly what the level is? There is some element of guess. You have to be confident as an installer that when you are guessing, it's in the best possible way by understanding when that house was built, as much as the homeowner knows about what's being done to it. The other view as well is, and I think it's definitely worth mentioning in terms of people being offered different size units. The unit number on the box can pretty much mean bugger all.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
An on the box 16 kilowatt unit can actually, at certain temperatures, only deliver 12 kilowatts. Another manufacturer's unit that says 12 kilowatts can deliver 11 or 12 kilowatts. So different manufacturers and the way they display their unit names can be misleading to the homeowner in terms of what they think they are being spec'd. So, for instance, you can put, one installer on a 12 kilowatt load. One installer might recommend a Mitsubishi 14 kilowatt unit, and another installer might recommend a NIBE 16 kilowatt. And the homeowners sat there going, "But I'm only 12 kilowatts, and what's going on here?" Really about understanding the outputs at all of the design temperatures that you look at when you are looking at designing for the output for that home. So I can appreciate that's incredibly difficult when they are not comparing apples with apples, but they don't really understand why.
That's really interesting.
That is interesting. So I'll actually give you a specific example, and maybe you can give us some advice for this particular follower, because they've just had 3 installers that came to their property. I think it's about 126 square meter property. And they had 3 different quotes come back, one for an 8 kilowatt, one for a 12 kilowatt, and one for a 20 kilowatt air source heat pump. And you can understand why there's a big level of confusion for this homeowner thinking, well, I've only got 126 square meters that I'm actually heating. Why has somebody told me that I should have a 20 kilowatt heat pump? So what kind of advice do you give to people like that to try and figure out which heat pump would be better suited for their property?
Oh my goodness. It's a bit of a minefield, if I'm honest. The thing with heat loss calculations and the thing with the whole view of a heat pump sales cycle is they are an in-depth piece of work. Some companies will charge the client for that either on a 50% upfront basis or will knock it off your bill. But a lot of companies, will do kind of up to a certain amount of work before, and then they look to crunch up with the client and then complete it afterwards. We do heat loss calculations in order to be able to quote. The view then that the client says, "Can I have a look at them?" Hang on a minute. Piece of work that I've done, you've not committed to a sale with me, and you might want to take my heat loss calculations and scootle off to somebody else to see whether you can get another quote for something different. It's a really difficult thing. And the view that you go and get your own independent heat loss calculations, and an installer like me is going to go, "Well, I'm going to do them with my own anyway because I don't trust that." I totally appreciate from a consumer perspective. I think that just gut feel 126 meters square, unless that is, like a glass cube. 20 kilowatts sounds like a phenomenal heat loss for that building.
Yeah, I would have thought that if he's got a quote for 8 kilowatts and a 12 kilowatts, at least those two seem like they're in the same ballpark. Whereas the 20 just seems really
way off the radar.
Yeah.
My biggest advice to any consumer, is you really have to trust your installer. Ask your installer the tricky questions. If the installer can't answer you on a technical level and cannot explain each basis, I might not give you my heat loss, but I can bring them to a meeting and I can point out to you where I've got this heat loss from, and tell you and explain and justify why I think my 12 kilowatt is better than his 8 kilowatt, or, is definitely better than a 20 kilowatt. You have to get that level of trust with your installer. And a knowledgeable, experienced installer will be able to justify and demonstrate and show a consumer where they have got their calculations from. Absolutely.
Another question that we've received recently that I think we know the answer to, but we're not the professionals, they're the experts. So we're going to leave this one to you. But is there ever a time when you would need, as a homeowner, planning permission to install a heat pump, whether it's ground source or air source?
You will need planning permission if you are installing an air source that is over 0.6 cubic volumetric meters.
Okay.
Oh, great.
It's specific. At least it's specific.
Yes, it is. The permitted development rules allow for you to install one heat pump that is under 0.6 meter 3 in volume size. And there are a number of air source heat pumps on the market that do exceed that. We have actually raised this with some of the powers that be, because this is not the case in Scotland, and we understand why it is the case in England. You also need planning permission if you are going to install more than one heat pump. So if you have what's known as a cascade system, where you're running 2 or 3. So anything, if you need 2 units, outdoor units, you need planning permission if you are going to put it within less than 1 meter of your boundary. So if you have, if your place, the permitted development rules say that it needs to be at least 1 meter away from your boundary lines. If that's not possible and you needed to be closer to your boundary lines, you would have to get planning permission. And I do believe that there is a random thing that says you need planning permission if you've also got a wind turbine.
Oh. Well, we just didn't know the answer at all. We were completely wrong.
Yeah,
so I'm glad we didn't guess.
But in most cases, it is permitted development, and unless you are in conservation areas or the certain neighbourhoods and parish councils have got side rules that you need to adhere to. But yeah, in most cases, the permitted development. Ground source, you shouldn't, as long as it's your land, you shouldn't need any permission, because you're digging it in, there's nothing to see.
So getting back to design just for a second. So the one thing I've always been quite curious about is there a big difference in the thought process when you're designing an air source heat pump versus a ground source heat pump system?
On the design side, on the heat loss, no, absolutely not. You are just looking for, what is the appropriately sized unit. The things to consider air source over ground source, of course, is if it's ground source, you've got an additional design aspect. How long are your boreholes, how many boreholes you need, how much loop, how many ground loop do you need to put in a field, how much space is that, what does that layout look like in terms of going back and forth to your manifold. With an air source, you don't have that, but you need to think about where you're placing it outside. Again, permitted development rules about boundary lines, but also, sound output requirements, MCS020, in terms of measuring the sound output for your neighbours. Also, just, common sense, you don't want to put one under your bedroom window. Turns on and you've got your window open, might annoy you. Otherwise, it's about internal placement stuff. The biggest difference between an air source and a ground source is that you will need a bigger internal area, because it's a bigger unit that you will have that runs the heat pump. That is the heat pump. For an air source, you're talking, you need a space for a hot water cylinder. I know there are other technologies coming out of the market that are replacing the domestic hot water cylinder, but in most standard setups, it's still a domestic hot water cylinder. That is, it's a round 600 by 600 footprint thing, how big, how it can get bigger, depends how much hot water you want. Then you've got, expansions and buffers and ancillaries and your control unit, which, is not very big, but we're looking for about a meter and a half, 2 meter, a decent size cupboard. You can get really wonderful setups. You can split the setups where you have your cylinder in one place and controller and stuff in another place. You have to consider pipe runs, ground source. It's just a bigger setup, 2.5, 2 meters required.
You mentioned that you don't think that there are properties that heat pumps won't always necessarily be able to heat. In what instance, or is there an instance where you would not recommend putting a heat pump in?
Yes, but no. But we are a bit heat pump purists, and we would like to think that you can heat pretty much anything with a heat pump, but you have to be aware of the project and you have to be aware of size, and then it becomes down to economies of scale. Am I going to really specify a 4 air source heat pump cascade system for a manor house because they don't have the land or access or hold? How much is that going to cost? The view that there are certain properties where a hybrid or bivalent system might be useful. For me, comes down to acts of vandalism on beautiful buildings. If you have got grade 2 listed properties with the beautiful parquet flooring and the gorgeous old-fashioned radiators, the view that those radiators can't, or the distribution system can't be fettled enough to provide the heat output at the lower flow temperatures, for me, then becomes questionable in terms of a heat pump only solution. You're going to need some higher temperature at some point because, to stick a steel rod in a 15th century manor house might look a bit incongruous. But the view that, doing hybrids now in smaller properties feels a bit like we are scrimping on the actual job in hand. Leaving a gas boiler as part of the low carbon solution when the writing is on the wall for the gas boiler, and when you can have a perfectly good heating solution maybe for the next 20, 25, 30 years, and then the gas boiler can't be replaced and the heat pump is undersized, not working, not providing the heat output for that building.
So your current, that's a really interesting point actually about just you being sensitive to the architecture of properties. Is your majority of your customers at the moment retrofits? And are you starting to see any increase in demand from new builds?
So the majority of our customers are the self-build, new build, custom build, big renovation clients. So, the types of properties that are just in grade 2 listed buildings, manor houses, converted barns. We're doing, I think, 3 grand design properties this year. We do an awful lot in the self-build, custom build market. What we're seeing, of course, is an increase in the call for the retrofit market, the likes of which we've never come across before. It always felt a bit like, the people who were looking at the gas boiler retrofit 18 months ago were like, forerunners of what we knew was coming. And of course, now the inbox is full of people on gas boilers looking to make the change. Traditionally, our retrofit market has been on oil. Again, the rural property, the oil properties tend to already have a bigger plant area. They often have a domestic hot water cylinder as well. That's been our retrofit market. But as I say, the increase for us is the view of people with gas boilers now seriously looking. I'm doing it actually. We've done just where I am in Sheffield. Just within 2 miles of the office, we've done 4 recently.
So IMS, when you're looking at going in and speaking to a client about a project, what are the kind of brands that IMS or the manufacturers that IMS feel most confident in using in a project, both for air source and for ground source, so that those customers can kind of do some preliminary research on those brands and kind of find out a little bit more about those brands and their reputation?
We specialise in using NEBA and Valent. NEBA air source and ground source and the Valent air source, although we are excited to see the new Valent ground source when they are launched. Why do we use them? We use them because they come with 7-year parts and labour warranty, which is industry leading. You can with Valent go to 10 years, which I think, is a stamp of the manufacturer's
confidence.
Yes, manufacturers' confidence in their own products. We have direct relationships with both of those companies. I'm not on a billion yen corporate bank sheet somewhere. I know that, I have relationships with both of those companies. One's in Belper, one's in Chesterfield. So we always go on the door. The Valent Aerotherm Plus, this phenomenal. They were the first ones, I think, to move into the low carbon refrigerant, and the benefits of that have been excellent efficiencies from the Aerotherm Plus. The NEBA ground source, they just, both of them just do what they say. It's the run seal effect, isn't it? They do what they say on the tin. The control is great. The integration with other systems, as we've talked about, is fantastic. And the view that we do a lot of work in Scotland, and these systems do work. Sweden is where the NEBAs are manufactured. I think they've been manufacturing heat pumps for 70 plus years. It's a heat pump technology. Up in Scotland, they just had the worst winter. My colleague Alan's heat pump was showing minus 9.4 outside, and he was, flashing his online screen of his 20-degree heated home, and they just, I often laugh, I call it the Alan Donald effect, which is we'd all like to be off over Christmas, and we are, and nobody phones.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good sign. So you did mention, just picking up on what you said a little bit earlier in the interview, you mentioned that, for example, the planning permissions are different for Scotland and England. Are there differences in other areas of the ground source and air source? So for customers in Scotland, Wales and England, like, for example, grants or any other things that people should be aware of?
Yeah, the Scottish have it so much better than the English. I have been saying for a while that anything Boris can do, Nick can do better. It seems a little bit of one-upmanship. They have, even while the RHI has been going, they have a 0% interest-free loan scheme that allows Scottish consumers to borrow money from Scotland Government Energy Saving Trust to do a number of energy efficiency upgrades, including replacing fossil fuel systems. The view that people can access the capital to do the things that they want to do at 0% interest free, phenomenal. Wow, how to get rid of one of the barriers. They also have that scheme for small and medium-sized businesses, where in England we have nothing. And they have then added to that scheme by giving you 75% cash back against your loans. So you could effectively take a portion of your RHI up front rather than waiting for it to come back over 7 years. The boiler upgrade scheme will not be working in Scotland. It's not a Scottish scheme, but they have committed to their 0% interest-free loan and 75% consumer cash 2024. Phenomenal.
Wow, certainly sounds like England.
Far more progressive than Scotland by the sound of things.
Yeah, where's Sunak? We need to get on to Sunak and find out what's happening with his budget. So you mentioned some of the really exciting projects of grand designs, and you've got a lot more demand coming from self-builds. If you're building your dream home, I would love to do that one day, and you're really getting stuck into your self-build, at what stage in that process should you be looking at contacting your air source, ground source, heat pump provider and talking to them about, okay, I'm building, I need to start to, what do I need to start doing? What do I need to be considering before you get too far down? Don't think you want to be getting to the stage where you've moved in and you're wallpapering the house and then thinking about your heating. So what is the right point to then contact that installer?
You literally can't contact them early enough. What we find, we're engaged by architects and by homeowners directly. The view that we can input into the design as early as possible in terms of defining plant area requirements, defining spaces for manifolds within the build. In some cases, just by dint of having a heat pump as part of your planning application can help you, depending on whereabouts you're looking to build. the view that you're building a more sustainable home can absolutely tick some boxes. We do engage with architects in terms of like CPD sessions, but as soon as you've got, a half-formed set of plans, if it's something that you're thinking about, the view when you're starting the build, you see, if you're going for a ground source, if you've got a man on your land with a digger who's taken out your foundations, what a perfect time to do some trenching, get somebody to come back and do it. All of these things can be aligned within your build program, so that you have that whole view of when things are going to happen. So as soon as possible.
Well, thank you very much for explaining so much to us, Emma. I think that some of that was really valuable and really interesting. Definitely about the takeaways for me, the difference between Scotland, England, Wales, the planning permissions, self-build, start early, thinking about your air source and your heat pumps and your ground source and all those things. So yeah, I think there's some really fantastic takeaways. So thank you so much for your time, Emma, and explaining all of those things to us.
Oh, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.